Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Well-Rounded Saxophonist, a podcast that aims to provide valuable information to young saxophonists and music students in a digestible amount of time. I'm Owen Robinson, and today I will be interviewing John Ellis, a prominent American jazz saxophonist. Ellis holds a music degree from the New School in New York City and placed second in the 2002 Thelonious Monk International Jazz Saxophone Competition. He has also worked with John Patitucci, Brian Blade, Jason Marsalis, Nicholas Payton, Robert Glasper, and many others. John, thank you so much for being on the show today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I've been reflecting on a question I asked you when you were a guest at Florida State last year. I asked if the competency of the rhythm section affected your ability to focus. You told me that the focus is always the same, but the situation is always different. I like this answer, and I've thought back to it. One thing that many students neglect, I think, is focusing while they practice. I think sometimes at a young age, we expect to be able to flip some kind of switch and focus up when it's time to perform, but it really doesn't work that way. Do you have any advice for younger students regarding focused practice?
Hmm. I don't remember you asking me that question, but it's interesting. I guess I would, at the moment, make a distinction between the focus of performance and the focus of practice, because I think they are different in the sense that, well, let's say that as a jazz musician, I play a lot, which might be different than I remember when I was playing more classical music, there's just a tremendous amount of preparation for this kind of one thing that you do. And so I would say that my professional life is quite different than that. It's a lot of uh, highly unprepared performing because there's so much improvisation involved. And so I think focusing in the context of a performance, uh, there are different things to focus on than in practice. I mean, I think focus in general is so important, but I think uh, in performance with jazz, one of the things that you have to get used to is that collective improvisation means it's really not about you. And also it's not about you even when you're soloing, and not necessarily. So, I mean, practically speaking, I try to hear, I try to, while other people are playing, I'm always trying to, either sing the melody, hear the bass notes, hear the chords. So there's a trying to heighten your perception of the things that they're playing, but there's also an imagination part that happens simultaneously where you're also trying to hear. So sometimes I think we think of listening as passive, like I sat down and listened. And there's a real active listening involved in jazz improvisation where you're generating sound with your imagination. What is the sound of this song? What is the bass notes? And it's sort of like preparatory. When you're hearing it that way, you notice when people are playing something different more because it's not just so passive and you're not just, oh, what was that? It's like, what it's supposed to be. So there's kind of like the process of doing that and not stopping takes a tremendous amount of focus. It's kind of a meditation, not getting distracted. What did I play just now? Was it good? What am I going to play next time? Does the audience like this? Um, the bass is too loud. Why is that person looking at me? Why did I forget to get a drink? Like millions of things can take you outside of that process. But I think, especially for us who are not in the rhythm section, we're not playing constantly. We have to find a way to be constantly engaged so that we're not just like, oh, it's my turn. Oh, I played. Okay, now I'm done. Now I wait again for the next time, right? That's just kind of not how it works. It's the more engaged you are when you're not playing with the whole process, the more likely your playing will have relevance and will be integrated into what happened before and after. And you also won't be, for me, it's also you're not as nervous because you're just like something already going on. You're not like, oh my God, it's my turn. Better get up there. Oh, better do it. There's a kind of lens of the self that gets quieter when you're engaged in that kind of focus. So I mean, I'm not sure if that's, when you ask the question, I forget the context, but I would think of it that way. And I think when you practice, it's quite different because now it's just you. usually. If you're rehearsing, it's different. But if you're just practicing alone, then that is you still have to figure out how to be very focused, but it's you don't have the same kind of responding to unpredictable things that other people are doing. So you sort of have to, there are other things that you have to think about.
Right. That's a great answer. I think that's more or less what we were talking about when you were here. I think, yeah, I forget exactly the conversation. I think it had something to do with, a difference you felt with playing from, say, uh, a rhythm section at like a jam session somewhere, or playing with somebody as experienced and masterful as Brian Blade. I know you were talking about your time playing with Brian Blade when you were
Hmm.
here at FSU, and how there's when you play with it makes this sort of difference when you play with somebody who's, I mean, I guess for lack of a better word, who's that good.
Right. I mean, it does make a difference. I think, in some ways, this saxophone, it's interesting, right? In jazz, saxophone's out front. They play the melody. There's a certain kind of like, this person is the star, in the audience perception. My experience is always kind of inverted. Like the drummer uh, usually maybe the most in charge and the most capable of making the gig sort of like good or not. I think the drummer has the most control over that. A very good saxophone player playing with a rhythm section that's not good. Overall, that'll be a kind of a not good experience for everyone involved, the audience. But a mediocre saxophone player playing with Brian Blade will be great. So, it's worth thinking about sort of who leads. I mean, bass playing is also really unheralded because it's people don't know how to listen to the bass. It's quiet. But the kind of things that really good bass players do that are subtle and often go unnoticed, but that fix or hook up the whole sound, also very, very important. So I think in a way that the saxophone um, has at least control. I mean, if you're going to go up there and do a bunch of high kicks or whatever, and like make a big, if it's circus, then for sure saxophone, you can do it that way. But if you're talking about like a collective community experience where the music is evolving together and listening, and it's sort of like the drums and bass have more control. Um, so I mean, with all that in mind, then like, what can you do as a saxophone player? Like, what is how do you always have to navigate the different circumstances that you're in. I think that from a philosophical standpoint, I think that the best thing to do is not, I mean, this is what works for me, is once you're playing, if you're in a teaching situation, you talk about things, of course, but once you're playing, everyone is equal at that moment because the music is happening and everyone is humble in the face of that. And so you don't get too much into why do they do that? Why are they doing this? Why are they? You can't really, even if you think you're better, um, that better energy, which is judgy and kind of like pointing fingers at why things are wrong, and that's just not needed once the music starts. In my experience, I think that it's really good to try to cultivate a sense of like, what can I do to make this succeed? Um, and whatever is happening, that you're just adapting to that. Of course, you fail. I mean, failure is all the time in this process, but I think, and then later you might reflect, but a lot of, I think a lot of growth for me comes from that experience of like, what can I do to make this better? And basically not doing that, not able to make it better. And then now we go back to your other question about practice, then going back to the practice room and saying, okay, what can I practice that will better prepare me for that moment, that I wasn't able to do something in. Um, so, it's very instructive to play with people who are all different levels because you learn, you know, equally as much sometimes when it's just not working well, uh, I would say.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think in music school, I think we get sort of wrapped up in the perfection of things at a lot of music schools anyway. And I think some people really do lose sight of that aspect of, failure and regular failure being an important part of the process. If you weren't practicing things or trying things in real time you know, uh, that you're not already good at, then, those might not be the most worthwhile things that you're doing, you know. Um, I try to, you know, keep that in mind as, sometimes the thing that you don't want to practice or that's kind of scary is the thing that actually you should be working on right now, you know.
Usually, yeah.
Usually, yeah.
And I'm the same way. I mean, we're all the same way. Human nature.
Right. Yeah. So another question that I wanted to ask is, who are some of your biggest influences as a saxophonist?
Um, sure. So early influences. So I grew up in North Carolina in a very small town. By small town, I mean 200 people in my town. I played oboe in seventh grade. Um, without knowing what an oboe was, just because the band director was like, "Oh, we need an oboist," and I thought it would be cool to play something that no one else played. So, I had a very basic idea. So I played oboe a little bit, and then when it got to marching band time, ninth grade, needed something to march with, so I ended up playing tenor saxophone at that time. And then I got into the North Carolina School of the Arts, which is an amazing place, as an oboist. And was there for years as an oboist, but really went through a bit of a crisis in terms of realizing I just didn't want to do that. I didn't want to. I got enough of a vision of what being a professional classical oboist life would be like, and I just didn't want to. And that was the track I was already kind of on. So I convinced the saxophone teacher there to let me switch to saxophone, and he took a great risk on me. And fortunately, his name is James Holick, and he just turned out to be a really one of a kind, fantastic teacher and mentor. And because I started with him fairly innocent, I hadn't had I knew I had studied music and studied oboe, and I knew some things about music, but saxophone, I hadn't really had much teaching. I was just kind of self-taught, and I didn't play that well. But he took a risk on me, and so I would say he's by far my biggest influence because that was the beginning, of playing saxophone for me. And I still think about the lessons he taught me, and the way he framed things all the time. So that was a direct influence. And then, after that, many, many other influences who were teachers. I mean, George Garzon was very influential here as a saxophone teacher, I thought. And then, you know, contemporaries, it's just like hard to list to them. There's so many, but when I was in New Orleans, of course, Branford Marsalis, um, formatively Victor Goines was there. He was helpful. Um, Todd Williams, Ron Blake. These were both of them were really nice to me when I was a teenager, and I never forgot that. And then Josh Redman, Chris Potter, um, um, Seamus Blake, Mark Turner, Chris Cheek, Joel Fromm. I mean, it's hard to list them all. There's just like too many. These are sort of peers, and then I think transcription wise, early on it was Dexter Gordon, Sonny Rollins, Charlie Parker, um, Lester Young, Don Baez, Coltrane, Joe Henderson, um, Cannonball, Adderley. I'm gonna leave something out. I go through phases where I'm just very Wayne Shorter. Wayne Shorter sort of in every way, not just playing saxophone, but also just um, as a composer and as a kind of life in music. Um, so yeah, I mean it's too many. I'm sure I'm leaving out important ones, but
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's there's too many to, talk about all of them in
yeah, you were
any
talking about Hank
detail.
Mobley. Yeah, if you
Yeah.
bring up something like Hank Mobley, like the record Soul Station is for me kind of a perfect record in the way that the whole thing unfolds the playing, everybody's playing, the writing, the it's sort of like a perfect record. So I transcribed all of those solos.
Mhm. Yeah, I did remember this year, and
Yeah,
yeah,
it's just
and
clear
yeah,
and beautiful, clear and super clear and beautiful. Great for learning.
yeah. Oh, exactly. I mean, coming from a classical saxophone undergrad and like with some maybe some idea of how to play jazz and changes and stuff, like studying his vocabulary and transcribing Hank Mobley, like taught me how to really play clear lines. You know, just his lines are just so well constructed and they just like they flow so well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so, I guess kind of segueing from to, you mentioned Chris Potter, Josh Redman being influences. Like to me, a young-ish music student, names like that are like, I mean, it just, sounds intimidating hearing about those kinds of players. I was watching an interview with Michael Brecker, where he was asked if he was intimidated when he got called to play with McCoy Tyner, and he said he wasn't because Tyner was so gracious and kind, and they just worked well together. I'm wondering if you have any similar stories to that where you were intimidated to meet somebody in the community or play with somebody, or maybe even the opposite where just you had the opportunity to work with somebody and it just kind of worked. I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, luckily, I would say most people are most of the people that I've been around are ultimately kind and, generous. Um, Sometimes there's a little stuff to dig through, but I mean, most people, like Ellis Marsalis was my big mentor when I went to New Orleans, and Marsalis, and there was so many reasons to be intimidated by him. And he was very kind and generous, and invited us to play at his gig. He had a regular gig at Snug Harbor. The first time I ever went on the road with a band was with his band. It was just a short trip over to Lake Charles, Louisiana from New Orleans, but really generous, in life and in the music too. Just kind of um, was very kind. Most of the people that I had a chance to work with were more or less like that. Um, yeah, I mean, usually the nervousness, the intimidation, that kind of stuff, it's usually you doing that to yourself, and that of course I've had many times where I felt like that. Oh my God, someone's here. Oh my God, I should. It says a lot about Brecker, just also like his experiences and he had played a lot too, so that you you get into a habit of performing all the time, and then hopefully that builds enough momentum that you're not as likely to get intimidated if somebody shows up that you are concerned about how they might be hearing you. It's really funny when I actually did the mock competition twice. And the first time um, was I believe it was in '96. I was quite young in '96, and I was intimidated in general. I mean, you got to think what it's like. Like you don't really rehearse. You go up, you play. The band at that time was like Christian McBride and Lewis Nash and Kenny Barron, and you have like your 15 minutes, and then the judges are it's like Joe Lovano and Wayne Shorter and Jimmy Heath and Jackie McLean, George Coleman, and like that. These are the judges. So I had a friend that came just to check it out, and he ended up sitting really close to the judges, and they all sit there. And he said that Jimmy Heath, I forget, and who else, but it might have been, Lou Donaldson might even have been there. But Jimmy Heath used to basically what they did. Jimmy Heath would sit there, whoever he was talking to, and they would just make like hilarious nicknames for everybody who was performing. They basically like just basically made fun of us like the whole time, the whole time we were playing. And there was something really great about that. Like you think that they're all going to be listening to you and like, hanging on your Evernote. No, they're just laughing at you. They're just like having fun with each other and enjoying bantering and like they're listening too, of course. They're paying attention. But it's just, that was actually really kind of comforting to realize, like half the time when you're worried about what people think of you, they're really actually just not thinking of you. They're thinking about something else.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, I think I've had those experiences in, the much smaller world of classical saxophone where you hear this academic person with this great reputation, these great recordings, and then you meet them and they're like just a person. They're
Just a
doing
person.
just doing their normal person thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And
And
also struggling with all the same stuff you're struggling with, and that's kind of nice to realize.
right. Yeah. Wow, that hearing all those names too is amazing. I mean, just yeah, Wayne Shorter, Jimmy Heath has got to be one of my favorite tenor players. I didn't realize that Lewis Nash was in that band at the time. I actually got to play on stage with him when I was at Michigan State. I was in one of the big bands there, and he was one of the guest artists, and that was a pretty surreal experience. I remember one of the tunes he picked up the microphone and scatted over the tune, and it was gorgeous. It was amazing.
Yeah. Awesome.
Um, so I'm wondering, obviously, busy life as a jazz musician, but I'm wondering, what do you like to do when you have time to relax, and that's not music related?
Well, I mean, lately I've been kind of addicted to exercise, which is highly recommended to anybody who wants to play saxophone for a long time. Um, so that's become a huge priority, actually. I'm in this running like group. Let's say it's a loose group, and we're all running 1,000 miles a year. So, but we hold each other accountable and we get a little monthly update. So this is my third year doing that. Um, so that's great. I think I'm just doing a lot of anchoring type things. I cook a lot. I'm really into that now. Um, um, I think there's a lot of being a freelancer for as long as I've been doing it, things that you can do to kind of create some kind of stability, predictability, um, are appealing, But also New York is great. Like, me and my lady, we go to theater and dance performances, and there's always all kinds of stuff to do.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great answer. I'm glad you bring up exercise, which is something that myself and probably a lot of other musicians I think could do more of. You know, I think, I appreciate that you brought up the point about the longevity of one's career as a saxophonist, or really, I guess, on any instrument. If you don't take care of yourself, it's going to get harder to play as one ages.
I mean, we hang a heavy thing on our neck, and most of us, if you end up doing it intensely, even if you're in school doing it, you're already intense about it. Like you have the capacity to get kind of lost and lose track of the fact that you're hanging this thing on your neck and you're also carrying it. And I don't think I know anybody who's done it for a long time intensely that hasn't had pain, like some kind of music related pain, um, shoulder and whatever. So like just the older you get, or at least for me, and I wasn't like this when I was younger, which is why I have to do it now, I think. But if I have limited time and I'm like, well, I could practice or I could do this exercise thing, usually I exercise now. I mean, because it's actually better. It's better for the music, actually. I can play better if I do that. I had a lot of years of just kind of obsessive, you know, long hours of working on music in a way that was, you know, not so great for my like physical body. So
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, and I think that's something I've noticed as well is like, I like to when I am exercising, I like to swim laps, and
good.
I've noticed that has a direct, effect on my playing, my ability to just, I mean, focus on the music, not just, the technique of the music and what it is that I'm practicing and how much of it I'm getting right, but actually, have the energy to play and play well and be an actual interpreter and musician.
Mhm.
Um, and I think sometimes, I mean, being a student, I still get caught up in that, I have this, that, and the other thing that have to be done by X day. And I'm like, I could exercise or I could go sit down and practice. And a lot of times I think I choose to go just sit down and practice.
When I was your age, I did the same thing
Yeah.
always. So yeah, just I think if you can get some kind of exercise habits, I did exercise when I was younger, just not very consistently, or I would stop always. But as long as you kind of like do it enough that you can build a little bit of, let's say, like exercise literacy, to make up a term, then I think as you get older, it's a lot easier because you're like picking up something that you did, you just are, and you're trying to do it more regularly. But it becomes more and more, in your 20s, whatever, 30s, kind of whatever, but like I'm about to turn 51. The difference between people who are in their 50s who are like thinking about taking care of themselves with how they eat and how they exercise, and people who don't, it becomes people you see that like you go further and further apart, and I think I always wanted to do music for as long as I can. I mean, um, the whole Prodigy approach of like burn fast and burn out, just not really, doesn't is not really how I'm wired. So I feel like for me to do it, it just has to be on a different kind of timeline. So I want to be able to do it long enough that I can keep growing and that kind of thing, So many things I feel like I'm just starting to figure out, So it's just like I want to stay healthy enough to keep trying to get better.
Right. Yeah, no, always have admired, the musicians like Ron Carter, um, Pat Metheny, Rini Rosnes. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, just people who've had these extensive careers and are still, doing the thing at a really high level, and, you know, to me, I think I almost look up to them more sometimes than, the prodigies who, aren't here anymore, you know.
I mean, it just both are great, but it's just sort of what you're, learning about yourself and what's going to work best, you think, for you, you know.
Thank you for listening. This concludes episode 17 of The Well-Rounded Saxophonist, featuring special guest John Ellis. The music you heard in the episode was composed by Billy Strayhorn and performed by myself, Ethan Frank, on piano, Brian Allen on drums, and Dylan Sherman on bass. Please remember to practice smart and stay healthy.